This video should be watched after you have finished reading Chapter 4 of the novel The Great Gatsby. It's an important chapter in which we find out information about J. Gatsby's background and how he first met Daisy. To check your understanding of the chapter, you should be able to answer these 9 questions without any difficulty. Where are Gatsby's parents? Where was he educated? What 2 pieces of evidence does Gatsby present to Nick as proof that his story is true? Who is Meyer Wolfshiem, and why has Gatsby brought Nick to meet him? Who do Nick and Gatsby run into while they're lunching in New York? And who tells Nick the story of Daisy and Gatsby? What happened to Daisy and Gatsby? Why did they break up? What happened just after Tom and Daisy's honeymoon? And what does Gatsby want Nick to do for him? When Chapter 4 begins, we're back at Gatsby's mansion at the end of another long weekend party. His guests toast to him on his lawn while gossiping about him. And that should remind you of the adage, with friends like that, who needs enemies? The reference to von Hindenburg certainly suggests some nefarious behavior. And if you miss that, we have the unsubtle second cousin to the devil. In this chapter, Fitzgerald gives us a list of the names of the guests who went to Gatsby's mansion during the summer of 1922. The list itself is made up of names fashioned from the names of animals and plants. Many of the animals are predatory and evasive. They are recognizable names from history, like Stonewall Jackson, and infamous celebrities. One example is Ismay. In the 2020s, we don't know this name, but in 1925, his name was very much known. Joseph Ismay was a British businessman, an executive on the White Star cruise ship line. He was on board the Titanic, but survived the disaster and returned home. He was vilified for being a man who lived when so many other men had given up their lives to save women and children on the vessel. A 1925 reader would see this name in the novel and immediately understand. These aren't good people. The guests at Gatsby's are criminals, murderers, adulterers. They're the bad guys. Tucked in this list is more than the names. There's also whatever gossip there was to go along with the introduction. Here are just some of the crimes and misdemeanors committed by a few of Gatsby's guests. Drowned, had a fight with a bum, went to the penitentiary, ran over someone's hand while drunk, connected to the movie studios, manipulated the stock market, strangled his wife, killed himself by jumping in front of a train, shot off his nose in the war. What does this tell us about Gatsby? These aren't his friends, are they? What is Gatsby's job? How did he make his new money? Remember that in the 1920s we saw the rise of gangsters who profited from prohibition. Could Gatsby be a gangster? Well, the evidence certainly points in that direction. Gatsby's car is a symbol of his wealth and status. Look at the diction used here to describe the car. What words seem out of place? What words are familiar, ones that you might have seen in the novel so far? If Gatsby is his car, much like George Wilson is the Ford in Chapter 2, what can we surmise about Gatsby? This chapter is all about who is Gatsby. Keep note of all the ways we get to know him in this chapter. So far, we have the rumors of the guests to his parties, and they're all bad people. Now we have his car. As Nick and Gatsby drive to lunch in New York City, Gatsby tells Nick about his life. He tells Nick 3 times that his family is dead. He explains the Oxford rumors. They're true. Are you surprised? He tells Nick he's from the Middle West. Now, first of all, no one who's from the Midwest would call it the Middle West. And secondly, San Francisco is not in the Midwest. This is a glaring mistake that Nick doesn't correct. But wait, San Francisco is on the Middle West coast. Maybe Gatsby isn't lying. Maybe he's just talking about the West Coast. It's also interesting to note that San Francisco is about as far away from New York City as one can get. Does Gatsby assume that anyone from New York won't have knowledge of the West Coast, California, San Francisco? Curiouser and curiouser, don't you think? And what do you think of Nick's rather callous way of referring to the sudden extinction of Gatsby's entire family? Throughout the story, Nick is suspicious of Gatsby's words. Don't you just love the idea of a turbaned Gatsby? Nick says he imagines the ridiculousness of him hunting tigers in the Bois de Boulogne. Like Nick, we should be thinking that all of this is utter BS. Gatsby is, naturally, a war hero, but his war story is too much, don't you think? Nick doesn't believe a word until Gatsby produces actual evidence, which he just happens to have in his pocket. Yeah, right. Gatsby carries with him a medal from the war and a picture of himself at Oxford. And even though this only verifies the war and Oxford stories, Nick accepts all of it as truth. Do you think Nick is being naive? Shouldn't he be asking more questions? And as they drive on, Gatsby's even pulled over for speeding, but is quickly let go when the officer sees that he's a friend of the police commissioner. Gatsby tells Nick over and over again that a sad thing happened to him a long time ago. Assumingly, this is Daisy breaking up with him to marry Tom. But that's the story he leaves for Jordan to tell Nick at the end of Chapter 4. Do you remember all the rumors that you heard about Gatsby? Some more improbable than others. Well, now you've heard Gatsby's version of his story. We saw Nick's initial skepticism. What do you think is actually true? The story of Gatsby is really a story of New York. The line, "the city seen from the Queensboro Bridge," helps Fitzgerald explain how the city embodies the wild promise of all the mystery and the beauty in the world. New York represents all things modern, industry, and sin. From the bridge, before you are in it, the city is full of promise. A promise it cannot fulfill. As they cross the bridge into New York to fantastical images, a hearse and a limousine two specific types of automobiles, one for the dead and one for the rich. The hearse could represent the death of Europe as a center of civilization. Nick, rather smugly, hopes that Gatsby's nice car makes the mourners feel better. The limousine offers a glimpse into the promise of America, the beckoning future. Even these modish black folk seem to be wealthy and could party like Gatsby's equals. It's interesting to note that this limousine is passing Gatsby. It's a possible reference to Tom's book from an earlier chapter in which he was afraid of the colored peoples taking over. What do you think Fitzgerald is saying here about race and about the future of the United States? Gatsby's story is so fantastic, it feels like a fairy tale. It doesn't seem real at all. But it is New York, and that makes anything and everything seem possible. New York makes Gatsby real. How do you think Gatsby symbolizes the American dream? Is New York the epicenter of this dream? This chapter introduces one of the most memorable characters in all of literature, Mr. Meyer Wolfshiem. He is a business associate of Gatsby's. The description of Wolfshiem is not at all complimentary. In fact, it's highly prejudiced and stereotypical. It's anti-Semitic. He has a European accent, and later he tells us that he knows a real-life gangster. Meyer's job here is to talk Gatsby up. He's a personal reference. The sole purpose of this staged lunch is for Wolfshiem to corroborate Gatsby's stories to Nick. The most intriguing detail in the description of Wolfshiem is that he wears human teeth as cufflinks. Who does that? Not even a dentist. We learn soon enough that Meyer Wolfshiem is a mobster. Think Al Capone. Rosie Rosenthal is the name of a real gangster who was killed outside a restaurant. Wolfshiem claims to have been there. Rosie Rosenthal, that's him on the left, was a New York gangster who had paid the police to turn a blind eye to his breaking of the prohibition laws. A policeman, Lieutenant Becker, that's him on the right, was in on this corrupt arrangement. One night, Lieutenant Becker led a raid on Rosenthal's speakeasy. This infuriated Rosenthal, who informed the police authorities what one of their own was doing. Becker was arrested and charged with corruption. Before Rosenthal could testify at Becker's trial, he was gunned down outside a hotel by Lieutenant Becker himself. As a result, Becker was executed. This photograph is of the real Rosie Rosenthal's funeral. So Fitzgerald has given us a true story in a fictional tale. What does this say about the novel and about Gatsby? At the end of this scene, we learn that Meyer Wolfshiem was the man who orchestrated the match fixing of the 1919 World Series baseball tournament. This actually happened, and would have been a huge scandal at the time that Fitzgerald was writing this novel. Do yourselves a favor and do some research into this bit of sporting history. Match fixing is not the preserve of cricket teams, it appears. After Wolfshiem leaves, they run into none other than Mr. Daisy Buchanan, Tom. Nick introduces Gatsby to Tom, and Gatsby is visibly uncomfortable. And then he does what he does. He disappears. In the Baz Luhrmann film version of the novel, Joel Edgerton plays Tom Buchanan. It's a masterful performance, a sinister performance, especially this scene. Try to watch it. At this point, Jordan takes over the storytelling. We see these events through her eyes, not Nick's. Jordan has hardly convinced us that she's an honest person, so we move from one unreliable narrator to another. What Jordan tells us is hearsay, and none of us can really know the truth. Are any of these details true? We'll never know. But Jordan is fulfilling her one and only duty in this novel by telling the story of Daisy and Gatsby from the autumn of 1917, or fall, as Americans call it. Her telling of the story romanticizes Gatsby and Daisy. Do you notice all the references to the color white? An echo of our first meeting with Daisy in the Buchanan's home on East Egg in Chapter 1. There is the detail that Daisy's mother prevented her from saying goodbye to some soldier in New York. We can assume that this means, as Gatsby wants to believe, that Daisy was madly in love with him and couldn't be with him because her family wouldn't let her marry a poor boy. Is that the truth? Maybe. The picture on this slide is of F. Scott Fitzgerald himself in uniform during World War I. It's tempting to think that he saw something of himself in the dashing figure of J. Gatsby that he was creating in this novel. Within a year, Daisy moves on and is engaged to Tom. He buys her a string of pearls worth a lot of money. A lot. Today, that would be over $4 million. Why include this detail? What does it tell you about Tom, his family, Daisy and Daisy's family? The string of pearls will return at the end of the novel, so remember them. The night before the wedding, Jordan finds Daisy drunk and crying over a letter. She's ripped the pearls from her neck and declared that she will not marry Tom. She has a letter, and we never get to read it as it's destroyed in the bathtub, from, we assume, Gatsby, asking her to wait for him. But the letter dissolves in the water like snow. When an author talks about seasons, winter, spring, summer, fall, or time of day, mornings, afternoons, evenings, we can decide whether this is supposed to symbolize the lifespan of a person. Note that Gatsby's letter dissolves like snow, winter, representing the death of her relationship with Gatsby. Daisy married Tom with those pearls around her neck, and the fact that she married Tom without so much as a shiver is also a telling detail. She's able to move on from disappointment and supposed heartache very quickly, it appears. Jordan recounts how in love they seemed when she saw them after they'd returned from their long honeymoon to Santa Barbara, and romantically so. But she said it made her laugh. Why do you think that is? Jordan also tells the story of when Tom was in a car accident with the maid from the hotel they were staying in while on honeymoon. So here we have another car accident and another affair from Tom. Yeah, we have enough ammunition to thoroughly despise Tom. His response to getting caught is to take Daisy away to Paris for a year. In other words, no consequences for his actions. Jordan, in finishing her story, reminds Nick of the night in chapter 1 when Daisy hears about Gatsby again during that dinner. Fitzgerald points out again that it's Daisy's voice that is noteworthy. It's as though she's not a complete person, just a voice. As Nick returns to his role of narrator, note that he mentions the clear voices of the girls, a reference to Daisy, and then the Sheik of Araby, surely a reference to Gatsby. Earlier in this chapter, Nick said that he imagined Gatsby as a turbaned character. Is this it? And look at the lyrics to the song. Fitzgerald included the lyrics for a reason. What do you think? It's sexual and violent. And there's a reference to heat. Weather, you'll see how important the weather is in the next chapter, is always relevant. Now, when the author tells us it's hot, he's indicating physical discomfort and sometimes sexual tensions. Do you remember at Gatsby's party in chapter 3, when Jordan was called away by Gatsby? It seems that this is his grand plan, to get Nick to invite Daisy for tea so that Gatsby can meet her again, away from East Egg, away from Tom. What do you make of the line that Gatsby was delivered from the womb of purposeless splendor? Where does Gatsby come from? It seems that his splendor is not purposeless after all. It's all a ruse, a plan to win back Daisy. He hopes that his house can attract Daisy, like a moth to a light. Look at the first quote on the slide. Who is the pursued? Who is pursuing? Who is busy? And who is tired? Is that 4 different people? Nick decides to help Gatsby, or at least he's considering it. Jordan has already helped Gatsby. This is the barrier of dark trees into the bad morality, into the secrets, into a life of crime. You should be able to feel that we are moving into a different, much darker part of the novel. Fitzgerald's editor, Maxwell Perkins, sent some pages of the script of the novel to the artist, Francisco Tsugat. Tsugat sent several drawings back, and upon seeing this art, Fitzgerald said, "Don't show this to anyone. I've added it into the novel." Which came first, this painting or this paragraph? We'll never know. We know that Daisy is Gatsby's disembodied face. Who is Tom's? And why is the face described as floating? Another great writer, Kurt Vonnegut, said that all romances follow this formula. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl. We'll have to wait and see whether this is true for Gatsby and Daisy. If you haven't done so already, you should create a symbolism chart in order to track the various symbols throughout the novel. Choose 3 to 5 symbols to track. Go back to chapter 1 so that you can see how your selected symbols have changed. Some common symbols have been listed here, but you should feel free to add to the list. The answers to the questions asked at the beginning of this video should not be too difficult. Let's see how you did. Gatsby's parents are dead, along with his entire family. Surely a tragedy of epic proportions must have wiped them out. Gatsby was educated at Oxford University in England. He is able to produce an inscribed medal, apparently awarded to him for bravery in the war by Montenegro. Meyer Wolfshiem is, in the politest of terms, a shady businessman whom Gatsby uses to corroborate his stories about his background. Nick and Gatsby bump into Tom Buchanan at lunch. Jordan tells Nick the story of Daisy's first meeting with Gatsby during the war. Daisy marries Tom. It appears that Gatsby isn't rich enough, he's not good enough for her social standing. We are told that Tom's infidelities started while they were on honeymoon. He was involved in a car accident with a hotel maid who was in the vehicle. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Gatsby's big plan is a reunion with Daisy. He wants Nick to invite her to tea. The stage has been set. Will Gatsby get his girl? You'll have to read ahead to find out. Once again, a shout out to American colleague Amy Goldman, who inspires me every day to be a better teacher of this novel. If you have any queries, please contact me on the email address that you see on the screen.